This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
I was just kind of living for myself and like what the next success marker would be. And that was really material success, right? And so that started my journey in saying, okay, how do I define success for myself that's beyond a money marker?
My guest today, she's fancy. You're fancy. Let's call it. I mean, like, you're good and you're noble and you're a doctor. And I mean, and I hit it off with you the minute we jammed the first time. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Angela Jackson here with me. Harvard lecturer, that's where the fancy comes from, in my opinion. ESG advisor, thought leader, keynote speaker, writer, author. I mean, did I miss anything?
You didn't miss anything, but you're making it sound so good. I'm so grateful to be here. I need to take you wherever I go.
Oh, yeah, I'll be your hype person. I will gladly be your hype person. I guess we should start with where in the world is Dr. Angela Jackson? And, you know, I'm in San Diego, so it's a beautiful day here. Where are you?
So I'm right outside of Boston in Brookline, and that's where I spend the fall semester where I'm on faculty at Harvard University.
So talk to me about your journey to Harvard, because you've done a lot of things. How'd you get there, and why did you want to go there?
People ask me about my journey all the time. It actually started in the private sector. So I worked for Viacom, Nokia, building new businesses domestically and internationally, and had been doing that for a number of years, rising through the ranks. And then there was one trip back in 2007. I was in LA for some business and took a wrong turn too soon and ended up totaling my car while I was on business. And it literally just stopped me in my tracks. Literally, I was in physical therapy for about 6 months, and I had a lot of time to think about my life and work. And up at that time, I'd been like that movie Up in the Air. And so I had, literally, I'm one of those million milers on American, United, and Delta. But I wasn't in a relationship. I hadn't seen my family. And I realized that moment I could have died. And so that really put me on a track while I was sitting there in physical therapy for months, thinking about like, what do I want this like next chapter of my life to be? And that really steered me on work, the purpose of work, because this incident happened while I was at work, and really how people can have more fulfilled and sustained careers and lives while working.
I'm not going to let you just skirt over the accident, just 6 months of PT. Can you give me a little bit more color on why do you think it jolted you? I mean, I know why it jolted you, but get a little bit more on why then. I mean, you'd gone on this crazy work adventure and made a pretty significant shift. So can you just share a little bit more?
Yeah, I think my identity was really rooted and tied to work. So I was raised by my grandfather. He was like a factory man, worked for Chrysler, started there, retired there, and really raised with this aspect of like, you should be proud of a good day's work. And so a lot of my identity was tied to the workplace and how efficient I was. I was this master multitasker, in many ways still am, recovering. But for me, in doing that, nothing else really mattered. It was like the success metrics that we see, you're watching the colleagues in front of you and some of the mentors you have and people, you aspire to, and not really looking at other aspects of their lives. You're just really focused on what their work life looks like. And for me, that's where I put all of my attention. And so, things were thriving in that aspect. But when I thought about like what makes you a whole person and, be able to have a conversation with you today, it's more than just work, right? It's the work that you do to make money, but it's also like, if you can and get it right, the impact that you'll have in the world.
I mean, that is exactly the work you do now. And I still want to delve into the personal stuff because I think I don't want the audience to just see Dr. Angela Jackson. I want them to see Angela, right? And like how that person went on this journey. I mean, your work today, when I look at it, I feel like, and this is an overused word, so forgive me, but like you're kind of at the intersection, right, of social impact and profitability and social change, frankly. I kind of put three parts of the intersection. So maybe the first question is, what's the fourth? Like, what else, in your opinion, is at that intersection there when you think about the work you do? But then also to keep this human, and I'm only going to go here because you're a multitasker like me, so it's sort of a two-parter. I think we're these little kids trapped in these adult bodies, and we're just doing the best we can, And you really landed with me when you said we're kind of all on the train tracks going through life, and you think you're exactly where you should be. I could see myself in New York City at one of the big creative agencies, and I think when I was in it, you don't realize you're on the train going through the motions, but when you eject yourself out of it and then you can kind of look down back at the train, you realize like, oh my God, I slipped into the machine and I was just going through the motions. Did it feel like that at all for you?
Well, that's exactly. And it's funny, you're talking about see yourself in New York. I was in New York at this time. And so when you're in New York, you're in your 20s, early 30s, you start looking at the markers for success, right? So I owned an apartment in Manhattan. I had a luxury car. I could get car services. You have this expense account that takes you around the world. And, you find yourself out at happy hour after work each day and you're commiserating with everyone because you're overworked. But how cool are you to be so overworked? And you're caught in emotions, but the emotions are going so fast that you really don't have a break. You go from that happy hour to maybe a dinner, you wake up and you do it again. There's not that time for really reflection or thinking, what else could there be? And everyone's around you, right? You're surrounded by the same rat race, right? And so unless something physically stops you, where is that time to think? Like if you would have asked me before the accident, do you have 6 months to spare doing PT and sitting on your couch? I'm like, when, where, who? That's like, that would have been my utter nightmare. And for me, that time, although then I didn't see it as that gift, it was extremely painful, was just really a gift to slow down, to think, for a moment, could there be another way to do work? Can I redefine success in a different way? And I think most importantly, you start thinking about like your individual, like what matters most to me? Like, what do I want my impact to be in the world? And think about how could that look in terms of a chapter and being more intentional about that.
Can you share just a little bit more about the accident? I don't want to trigger you here, but what happened?
Yeah, no, not a trigger at all. So, I tell people, at that time, I thought I was so fabulous and so busy. I was this businesswoman, and I flew into LA for basically less than 24 hours. I got there at like 4 in the afternoon. I was going to be leaving on a flight at 1 the next day, and so I was going to go present at a meeting. I was working for Nokia at this time, and so I was going to go flew into LA, present at a meeting, get on a plane, stop in New York, and then the next day I was going to be back in Europe and Finland. And so when I woke up that morning, I was like, I hope when I present, there's not too many questions because I need to make sure I make that flight and get to, LAX and then get my dry cleaning so I can get on the flight the next day to go to Europe. And I was just so in my head about that. Like I wasn't even present. And I had lived in LA. I drove this route, from the Four Seasons over to the LAX area where this meeting was happening. But I just almost missed a turn on Duhaney. And the one thing I'd say is the accident was actually my fault, right? Like I was about to miss my turn. I made a turn quickly and I didn't realize that there was oncoming traffic. And so at that moment, I was like, I remember the woman just distraught who hit me and was worried because my car was completely totaled and she was so worried. And I just looked at her and another person got out and said, I'm a witness. He was like, it's her fault. That her being me, Angela. And I was like, it is my fault. And I just remember sitting there with this totaled car, this woman's distraught and just understanding like, I caused all of this. And it's because I'm not present. Like it hit me. I was like, I wasn't even thinking about this moment. I wasn't even like really present with where I'm going. I was already 2 days away and thinking that was most important. And so I would just say for me in doing that, when I say, I could have died that moment, I really meant that, single, no kids. And I was just kind of living for myself and like what the next success marker would be. And that was really material success, right? And so that started my journey in saying, okay, how do I define success for myself that's beyond a money marker? Because you can still have all of that and be very unfulfilled.
One, thank you for sharing all that. And, this is the Courageous Podcast. And I think it's not an easy share. Two, in this equality world we've finally moved into, I'm not sure I can green light this question, but I'm going there. Like, how old were you when this happened?
I love that. I love that. So I was probably 31 around the age when that happened.
Okay. Let's see. I find that really interesting because I left New York City at 28 and I met my wife 6 years later, and I feel very blessed, I guess is the word, that we didn't get married at 20. Like New York City, like I knew who I was. And by the way, New York City, to your point, I describe New York City like a treadmill on 10.0.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's really hard to get on. And if you can get on and not bust your chin, you can stay a while. Like once you figure out the pace, but it's almost just as hard to get off. It's like, because it's not stopping for you or anybody. It's got to do its thing. Right. So by the time I jump off, and then I stumbled through a duct tape startup, as I like to call it. It took me until I was around 33, 34 before I figured I knew who I was. And I was let go of this agency and this creative agency back in New York. And I now look at that moment as my version of your accident. Like it was my negative blessing. It was my gift. I would have been on the same train for a long time if it wasn't for them. And at the time, you can't recognize I had a chip. I was pissed. I was sad. I was mad. And now I'm like, oh my goodness, thank goodness that happened, because I never would have moved to California. I never would have become an entrepreneur. I never would have met my wife. We wouldn't have our kids, wouldn't have this podcast. Like that's where my brain goes. When you think back now to this moment for you, I mean, it sounds crazy to say, was this your negative blessing? But do you see it that way?
I absolutely do. Like it was at that moment where I realized I created this, right? Like I designed this. It's something that it was a vision in my head. I wanted to make. I'm from the Midwest, a small town. Like I said, I was raised by my grandparents, but like I wanted to go to the big city. You watch the movies about New York and everyone's making it happen. And I was like, I want to be part of that. And I thought, I got to the point I manifested like all that I wanted there. And so I think the big thing was me thinking, do I have the power to create something different, right? Something of my own, thinking how I want to work, who I want to work with. It's funny when I talk to employers now, CEOs, they'll complain about millennials. And, for me, can I just say, I love them. And I feel like they have the courageousness, right? And this is, the Courageous Podcast that I didn't have as Gen X, right? I put my head down. I didn't, things were quite right. I just wanted, affirmation. I wanted to get promoted, a little pat on the head. And I didn't realize at that point that there could be another way, or there was another alternative that was viable. And so, like I said, that you talk about that negative blessing, it was that where I had to sit down and say, okay, I'm in excruciating pain. And I didn't tell you the back end of the story. Finished this therapy. I went back to work. And the doctor said just one thing, you can go back to work, but you really need to keep your stress level down, because I had a lot of issues with the left side. I still do of my body. And anytime I'm stressed, it's exasperated. And they said, just keep your stress down. I said, okay, no problem. I go back to work. And I remember they going to a meeting with my boss at the time. And I was like, okay, give me a rundown on, what's happened since I've been out. And I was like, what decisions I've made. He was like, oh, we didn't do anything. We were waiting for you. I was like, excuse me? No, we didn't do anything on lots of this work because we were waiting for you and we didn't want to make. I was like, you were, and I remember this shot of pain, like went from my head down, like to my shoulder. I can feel it now. And I thought, oh my God, this is what this is about. Like, this is this life. Like, unless I do something differently, like nothing changes here. And so actually threw caution to the wind. The rat race is real. The golden handcuffs are real. I stepped away from that position and took a sabbatical. I moved to Europe for a year where I could really do some deep thinking about what I want the next chapter to be. went back to school, enrolled in a small Catholic, university, took journalism, politics, ethics, all in French. And there, I had a reflection. Like I said, it kept coming back to work. Like work caused this issue, but I also thought work could be a solution.
Wow. I mean, so this is now 18 months, correct? It's 6 months. I don't mean to keep going back to the accident, but when the accident happens, I mean, you know right away that it was your fault, right? But like, you don't know that you want to make this massive change. And I guess I have to ask, you said it was down the right side of your body. Like when you're were you in the car? Were you lying on the ground? Could you move? Like, do you remember this?
Yeah, I do remember. Well, I think it was part of it was just shock when it happens because it like again, if anyone, I talked to other people who've been in accidents, like unless you've been in an accident like that, even in the car today, like you never know. Like I never saw that coming. It came out of nowhere. So imagine I'm in my car, I'm listening to music, I'm in my head thinking about like where I'm gonna go and my plan. I remember what I was exactly thinking at that moment. And then there was the impact. And it's like everything went black. You got, airbags coming out into my face, bruises, arm. You've got, sirens, they're taking off the door to like pull me out and I'm like disoriented. I remember hearing the woman so upset. And then I remember hearing the person who saw it was like, it's her fault. And I remember just thinking it was my fault. Like I knew the turn, like there was another lane, right? Like I can see it now. I know the street. I was like, I just didn't think anyone was there. I didn't look. It was a blind spot. I'm not for sure. But out of that, it was like, this is going to sound crazy. They're like, are you okay? I was like, I just need to get to the meeting. So they took me in, they looked at everything and I end up going, this is going to sound crazy. I end up going to the meeting. I think I was still in shock, got on the plane. And in the middle of the flight, my body I think it was like fight or flight. It just completely locked up. So, I ended up being carried off the plane, like lost my laptop, all the luggage, and like directly to the hospital. And then directly from that into physical therapy, braces on, etc. And it was really scary. And so like that fly up in the air life ended like this, that plane, like it's before that and then after me sitting on this couch in New York, in this great apartment, laid up in excruciating pain and on meds, etc.
So how long between the accident and, let's use this word loosely, heal, or back to processing, okay, something has to change, or where was it in the 6 months where you kind of realized maybe this isn't my path?
Yeah, so it was probably halfway in between there. Like I knew I had to do something different, but then it was like, how do I plot and plan to do that? And so I was making great money and had savings, but like the way I grew up, you just don't quit a good job. Like it doesn't matter what you have. Like I knew if I told my family, they're going to be like, you're crazy. And so I started at a time what I called a freedom fund. And I said, okay, if I save up this amount of money, like I know that's going to be the level where I can leave my job. And so that took me close to like 10 to 12 months later where I could say I could afford, I felt, to take this time off and really dedicate it to like understanding what I want with intention for my life next. And again, it's so sad that that has to be a privilege, right? But like when you think about this country where your health insurance is tied to your job, my like mortgage payment in New York and everything that's associated with that. And so I got to that point and I remember going in to head of Nokia North America. I was working at Nokia at the time. And the guy said, I wonder if he remembers this. He said to me, I said, so I'm going to be leaving and I just want to let you know and just kind of explain a little bit behind it. He goes, we pay you enough to do that? And he was like, because, he had 5 kids, he had 5 kids in private schools. And although he's making a lot of money, he's spending a lot of money. And see, that's what New York life does for you, right? People have these glamorous lives, but they're spending at that level too. And so unbeknownst to him, I had been saving everything. I literally stopped spending for that next 10 months. It was like, I'm literally buying my freedom. And I thought at least for a year, I said, in that time, if I haven't figured it out, I can at least go back and find a job. I knew I had the skills to do that. Nokia would have welcomed me back if I wanted to went there, go back. It was very good terms. But it was during that time where I could think about what problems I wanted to solve is where I created my first business while I was overseas, came up the business plan. And then when I did return to New York, I launched that business. And that really set me on the trajectory that I'm on today.
Were you able to keep the apartment?
I still have the apartment.
Yes.
Wasn't it saying, I think they say Benjamin Franklin said that, buy property or buy land and not making any more of it. It was probably one of the best investments that I've had. I rented it out while I lived in Europe, and it paid for that, and it paid for, most of my rent there.
And you said you grew up in the Midwest. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up 45 minutes outside of Chicago, almost on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. So Chicago seems like a city. This was very much a rural town. People, had farms and animals, and, the big job was working for like the local Chrysler plant.
I mean, not a bad run here, right? Like I'm going back to fancy. Okay. Like let's call a spade here. You figured out a way to manifest this. You figured out a way, like even the story in your mind, your head was Four Seasons Hotel to Finland, right? Like, and then life slows you down a little bit. To me, one of the most interesting data points was when you went back to work and like nothing had progressed. And it's not to knock that group or that team. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff going around, but did you feel like there was a level of confidence it gave you that you knew that your motor was proactive and that you were going to continue to manifest in your life, whether it was there or somewhere else?
Yeah, I had a ex-boyfriend ask me this once. It's so funny because I got my doctorate degree later in life. And at the time he had gone through law school and he was an attorney. And I remember at this time I had only had just an undergraduate degree when we're talking about this phase. And it was funny. He's like, how do you have the confidence to do that? And I told him, I've always had confidence in me. Like I'm always willing to bet on myself. Right. And when I say that, I don't have confidence that I know everything, but I do have a deep belief that I can learn anything if I really apply myself. And that's been true. When I think about growing up in the Midwest, when I was in these, like, I remember my first corporate meeting, we're sitting at this fancy restaurant and I'm like, okay, which fork should I use and which knife? And, I was always the one who just sit back and like try to watch the person that I thought was like my mentor or a person I aspired to be. And I'd watch what fork they put on. I mean, I can't tell you, I would get hungry sometimes. And I'm like, please let someone pick up the fork so I can remember which one is mine or whatever the salad plate is. But like, that served me well. And I think my message, I'm talking to you, and this just came to me. There's this book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. That got me a long way by like watching other models of success or people that appeared successful to me. Like I didn't know other parts of their life. Many of them, I look back now, they'll tell you it was falling apart on many different levels. And I realized that modeling was great to get me up to a point. But then there was that point after the accident, I was like, I have to define this for myself. Like, because I'm only going to have myself to look in the mirror. And at the end of the day, like, I don't want to be so grave, but like you're on your deathbed, it's just you too, right? And just thinking about what impact. And for me, I felt a lot of gratitude for the success I had and really wanted to center something that's like, what's the longer impact that I could have moving forward?
Well, I think thank you again. Moving forward, let's move from Angela to Dr. Angela Jackson now a little bit. So, as you're overseas, you start this first business. The business was, give me a little bit of what was the business about?
Yeah, so the business was a children's language learning company and products. And so a lot of the work what I shared, I built new businesses around products for Viacom and Nokia. It was all around consumer products. And so I had this idea around building a children's language product for people like myself who were going to have kids who wanted their kids to speak different languages, be global citizens. I met a lot of them living abroad. I mean, I'd meet, colleagues at Nokia, they spoke multiple languages that gave them mobility. They could take on work projects literally around the world. And then you get to know them, their kids are like speaking 2 and 3 languages. And I just thought it gave them choice and optionality. And so my understanding was in the States, that was just not the case, right? And so partnered with school districts, not only throughout the US, but in Canada and Europe, selling these products, and built that business over 8 years, and then had an exit, which, I did well. And then from there, I decided I was going to go on the investing side of that business. And my investment thesis has always been around work, the future of work, and like what are the HR and workforce tech products that are enabling human thriving, for us to do work in a more sustainable way. So work has been my through line, all my life, and with intentionality, how I invest, how I advise, and what I teach at Harvard.
And I, look, I came out of advertising and marketing, right? So it's always been an exercise in body jumping. Right? You're stepping into the shoes of somebody else and jump into their body and try to understand their world. And then I've, as Courageous has taken off, we realized, courageous ideas die without courageous leaders. Good luck selling a courageous idea without a courageous leader. And so, half our business now is, I think, behind the scenes at companies, which drives us, I'd say 50, 60% of the time to HR, right? And here's one of the big tells that I've seen. When my team tries to introduce what we do at Courageous through HR, like let's say there's courageous conversations that are hard to have or courageous decisions that aren't being made. Okay, let's inspire the courageous culture. The one thing we look for, and I'm curious to get your take on this, I rarely will have my team reach out to somebody that has HR in their title, unless it's CHRO. But if it has people in the title, Chief People Officer, I'm like, that is our people. Like the light bulb has already gone off. And I'm curious in your work, in your research, because I feel a lot of empathy for HR folks or Chief People Officers. They're almost like at the end of the ELT by themselves, wearing catcher's mitt, trying to figure all this stuff out. Now that you're in the seat that you're in, what are you seeing?
Yeah, and I love that you're doing this. There's this book that I have coming out March 11th of next year, 2025, called The Win-Win Workplace, like how thriving employees drive bottom line results. And the reason why I mention that is because when we talk about chief people officers, like they're really understanding like what's the business case, right, for thriving. And they're very, like you said, they're in this role where, they've got many different stakeholders, really, right? They've got the C-suite that's talking to them, the business unit leaders, they actually have the employees, and they're at the center trying to really develop what is this value proposition. And being courageous around it is one of them, right? And it's so hard to do that. But when you see it's done well, and when I say I've had the privilege of seeing it, when we talk about the Fortune 500 and those 355 companies, I've been researching their data. A large part of that number, I've had conversations with the chief people officers, with the new chief of innovation that they've brought into many legacy organizations, and understanding what change they've identified from listening within the organization, and then what courage and what supports it takes for them to implement and operationalize those insights. And that's where it gets lost. And so I think a podcast like this conversation, when we have some of the leaders who have done it, who can, serve as exemplars to others on this is the road, being courageous in this way, leading with this type of value proposition. These are the dividends that it pays for the employees, but also for the business. It's really shifting the conversation. And as I think you might agree, in the future of work, when we talk about the modern workplace, this is going to be the currency. People who are leading like this. I was watching a commercial yesterday and I almost fell out. It was Humana and they were talking about, we're doing a new, insurance plan and we're going to make sure you get a card where you can buy good quality food and we're going to take care and give you a transportation benefit. That's the live reality that we know people need. we haven't been courageous to make those choices. We haven't been courageous to make the bets of saying, okay, yes, we'll invest in our highest talent and our highest paid talent, but actually we're going to take some bets and be courageous and invest from the front lines to the middle and helping them grow their skills. And not because we think this person's going to work here for the rest of their lives. We are courageous and we believe that we have a best place to live, that even if we train people and they leave, they'll want to return. And so these are going to be the modern workplaces that succeed. And these leaders who are in these like chief people officer and innovation roles, those are the ones who are leading the change. Like they see the bellwether. Now it's a matter of like, how do you network them? How do you inspire them? We have, business cases that I have in the book of corporations and leaders who are leading this change, talking about how they did it and how they brought stakeholders together and socialized the ideas. And so I really believe we need more of this in many different forms, like really shining a light on the leaders who are doing this work and doing it well.
Give me a little color on the study that you're doing. You mentioned like 355 of the 500. I think that was you were able to interview leaders at 355 of the 500 Fortune 500. Is that correct?
That's exactly it. And so right after the pandemic, I led this initiative called the Future Work Grand Challenge. We were trying to find 25,000 workers who were displaced by COVID and find them new jobs, transferable skills, and jobs that pay living wages, had ladders, et cetera. And so as we were doing that work, we're placing people in the jobs. And what we began to see were two things. One was people got in 6 months, 9 months later, some people were thriving and moving up the ladder. Others were like on to their next opportunity. And so my research institute got curious as to why. And based on those insights, we created the win-win workplace framework. And so it outlines 9 pillars that we saw in the workplaces where the employees were actually thriving. And then when we dug a little deeper, we saw these employers were implementing these like policies, not as a nice thing to do, they were actually starting to track them. And so we were able to track them to see the correlation. So they were not just feeling like they were donating the money, they were actually using it as a business investment and an investment in operations. And so we thought, if they're leading in this way, and this is their secret sauce, what if we were to present this framework to businesses small and large so they can consider these and think about how they could lead in the future of work?
All right. So there's 9 of them.
There's 9 of them.
Are they, I love all my children equally, or are they prioritized and there's were they weighted differently? Is there like a gold, a silver, and a bronze? Talk me through.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that. So the first pillar is the central pillar that undergird all of the rest of the ones. And it's around centering worker voice, which may seem easy, right? So people are like, we do worker surveys and we have a suggestion box and people can do anonymous polls. And the funny thing I say to that is we do a ton of listening. But if you ask, the latest report that came out, research was that 68% of employees feel that their employer doesn't care about them. So if you're spending all of this time and millions of dollars, right, listening, you've got a group of people who feel like you've not heard a thing. And so that's not money well spent, right? And so operationalizing that, the definition we use is that employees have a say in the matters that matter most to them. So when you think of many of the survey questions, it's really not about the employee, it's about the employer. And so really it's around these set of employers reframing, saying, okay, do you feel like this employer cares about you? We've got benefits. What are the benefits that matter most to you? Like there was one fast casual restaurant that moved the money that they were putting in 401k to doing emergency cash assistance that employees could get. They looked at using that money where people could repay their student loans, use that set of money for down payment assistance for a house or even an apartment. So again, really understanding like what's the lived realities of employees and like how can we better serve them? And then when you look after you understand like what the issues are and what matters most to your employees, you can think about the following strategies, and those are 2 through 9 that might speak to that problem or that opportunity. So, 2 is around thinking about how we relate to each other differently in the workplace. The example I give, I think we all heard the horror story of the woman who had been dead at work for like a week and no one had known it, right? And you think, how could that happen? But like, we don't really know each other at work. You know a colleague and you know this slice of their wife. You don't know what else is going on. And because we are so disconnected, we're saying, can we relate to each other? And, I talked about the one with benefits. It's also thinking about like, how do we look at the intersections of all identities that's beyond DEI? You could be a veteran, right? You could be a caregiver, thinking about how we like hire for talent, how we think about developing them at all levels, which I mentioned. And then the last two are really around how do we think about measuring this as a competitive advantage? So most employers have all of this data. They just haven't looked at it in this way. And what we noticed by these other employers who are really making strides on this end, they were taking the data they already have and actually looking at it to think about what are we hearing? What are the sentiments we're hearing? How are we operationalizing them? How are we communicating the things we can't do or can't do right now? Very simplistically, and really creating what the last pillar is like an ownership mindset and entrepreneurial structures. What we heard overwhelmingly year after year is that most workers want some type of agency. They want to feel like they are treated as an owner, that they're being brought into decisions, that their voice matters. And you've got this set of employers who are just actually doing that. I was on the stage of, I'm going to give her a shout out. Carrie Siggins is a CEO of this company called Stone Age. And, they have this ownership mindset and culture. And, we were on a panel together a couple weeks ago and she goes, okay, I got to tell you, she's like, this is not easy work. Like when you say you're going to take everyone's opinion, people are going to get upset when you don't listen. You have to communicate. You have to be humble, right? And have some humility in this and commit to being transparent. But she's like, but since we've done that, I can tell you how our efficiency has gone up. I can tell you how our returns have gone up. And that's because she's measuring it all, the before, during, after. And again, it's a journey. It doesn't stop. It's not a place you get to and then stop. It's something that's just ongoing and part of the culture.
Well, hopefully with success, of course, you would invest or reinvest, right, when you start to see some of this success. So you had talked about there's a study and then there's the book. And let me see if I got this right or if I missed it. So the study itself, you talked to 355 Fortune 500 companies. Was that the 25,000 employees?
The 25,000 employees were over 1,200 companies. That's where we developed the framework. And so that was back in 2021 that we did that bit of work. And then from that, just most recently, this past year, we took this framework that we developed over 1,200 companies and said, okay, we got curious. We're like, are any of the players in the Fortune 500 doing this? Because they're more public with their data, we're able to see that correlation. And so we mapped it and all of the findings held true. And then that was the report that we put out earlier this month. What'll come out next March are the case story studies that I'm telling you about. And we'll look at platforming those leaders, how they did it, and what was the actual business results that came from that.
The study is called what?
It's called the competitive advantage of the win-win workplace. And if they go to winwinworkplacereport.com, and I'll send you the link, they can put it on there. In that report, they're going to find the data of like, okay, what was the practice and what was the lift? Like, was there an increase of assets under management, asset value, shareholder price? And then what they'll find in the book is the actual like how-to guide, like how these leaders did it. So beyond just kind of a strategy, like what does it take to implement it? And, many of them started with pilots. They talked about some of the failures and bumps along the way and how they got to a place where they feel really good that they want to share the story more publicly.
Okay. And then those case studies are win-win-win at work. The book. Okay. And when's the movie coming out?
The movie's not coming. If you produce it, I'll do it. But, you promised me we are doing a summit in May, and we would love to have you and your viewers there. We're going to talk about this and have courageous conversations, because when you said that about having the courage to make these moves, we have the data, we have the insights. Now it's about the courage about like doing something different. Like this is not as usual, and really thinking about like how we move towards this more like win-win workplace versus a zero-sum workplace.
Yeah. And again, I want to kind of go, I'm nodding my head for those listening and not watching, but I want to go back to something I said earlier. Like the last thing I want to do is vilify someone that has HR in their title, right? Like I, I see this connected to the point you just made because how often is somebody who's in HR, do they feel like there's a value that's being violated when they're not aligned with a CEO's decision or a CEO doesn't see the importance of making these investments? I'm sure there's something in this data. What I always love about books or studies, and like people think I'm being, oh, like there goes Ryan Berman promoting his own book. I'm like, no, like gift knowledge. Like if that's what it takes to open up the conversation, and I think it is hard to be like, do you have a minute? This is messed up. Can we talk about this? It's always easy to be like, hey, I read this book. Read chapter 9. I thought about us. Can we talk about it? Much easier, open than do you have a minute? And again, different levels of courage, maybe, but easing into the conversation. So I will absolutely link the survey, the study, excuse me, it's the study to this episode. And then we got the book coming out. That's so exciting. One last question on the study and the book. Did you do that with Future Forward Strategies, or did you do that with the Harvard crew?
First started with Harvard with the 1200. Future Forward Institute is the institute arm where we do all of the research. And I have to say it was, sponsored by Walmart.org and others, Burning Glass Institute, and also Just Capital. So we don't do this work alone, but that came out of the institute. And to your point about research and data, any public company, that's what they trade on. It's data, right? That's what the CEO is reporting to the board. That's what the CFO, when he's talking about the CEO and they're making budgeting decisions. And so the reason why we wanted to bring out this piece of data, because it brings a different use case, right? And business case to it. So some people will be persuaded by the qualitative stories and the narrative behind it. Other people are really going to be moved to the numbers and really understanding, okay, I'm swayed by the story. Now let's talk about how we can economically make this work. And so we thought that piece of the puzzle was really missing. And when we think about a CHRO, a people person, this helps them do their job better, but also it helps individual employees. Like you said, when you want to broker a conversation with your HR department or with, direct manager, now you're coming with data about how it's a win for them, right? And it's a win for the department. And that's why we called it the win-win. It often seems like a trade-off. What we're trying to say is it doesn't always have to be. And let's try and approach it in some ways with that type of conversation and lens.
Wait, was it a win-win-win at work, not a win-win?
Yeah. So it's so funny. It's a win-win. But you know what someone said to me today? Allison Omens at Just Capital. She was actually, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the employee. It's a win for the workplace, but it's also a win, right, for that customer, that constituent, right? The outside investor that's investing in there, right? And she brought to my attention, and it's so true. When employees are treated right, even at retail, customers can get different types of service, which means that they spend more time in the store. Spending more time in the store means that you're leaving with a higher bill typically. And so all around, better service, it is a win for all of the stakeholders involved.
Time to buy a new URL. Time to change the title. Here we go. Big decisions for you. All right, let's go back to Angela, not Dr. Angela Jackson, to kind of wrap this up. So there's 3 words that really kind of pop for me during our episode, and I just want to get your visceral. Remember that? Do you remember? I'm definitely dating myself on this, but I'm going to go there. Remember the game Super Password, where someone would say one word, and then you'd have to guess. In the game, you'd be like hamburger, and then they would be like ketchup or whatever it would be. And so anyway, I'm going to give you, this is her way of saying she doesn't know what the heck.
I'm smiling because I'm I think we were both children of the 80s and 90s totally. Because I love a good game. And it's I'm leaning in because it's one I'm I didn't know about it, but I'm game to play it.
All right, so here we go. I'm going to give you one word, but I don't need you to guess. I'm not trying to, I just want your visceral response on how you would define it for you. And there's three words. Okay. So first word is impact.
For me, impact is really thinking about lives touched. And I think a lot about how I do that at scale. I remember when I was at, Viacom, I'm selling, cell devices and cell phones, it was like thousands and millions. And so right now in this journey in my life, I always think about like, how do I spread and scale my impact? I do that through teaching at Harvard, this research study, getting that out to a wider audience, the book as a leave behind, and just talking to you now, right? I know that certain people I won't meet one-to-one, but if they can take a nugget from what I've learned or the research I can do, to me, that's impact.
Second word is success.
For me, success is really about doing work of purpose. I work harder than I've ever worked before, but I'm working on the things that light me up, like the things I think really matter for me and matter for the people I care about and the people, that I love, right? And for me, that is like I'm working on purpose. And I think that's it for me.
Last word, joy.
Joy is a good conversation like this. When you find people who you're on, and even sometimes if you don't disagree, but like you want the same impact in the world and you see the vision, joy is like being in that conversation, learning something new that like pushes my thinking that I can go back and research and like circle back again. I could talk forever, as you can probably see. But this is joy for me and just a lot of gratitude. I just want to thank you for, sharing your platform, to the listeners for listening. And I always put this invitation out and I truly mean it. Like I'm on LinkedIn, and if people have ideas, if they read the research or if they have a case study that they want to share, like I would love to hear those. I take a lot of these stories with me that I hear when I go into my next interviews. And some of those, the research team actually jumps on and we do research and case studies around. So again, I just so grateful for this opportunity.
Oh, I mean, look, I think even what sparked these three words, I think we share a definition of logic, right? I see a lot of myself in your stories. I mean, the impact I wanted to make in my 20s is very different than the impact I want to make now. My definition of success in my 20s is very different than my definition of success now. My idea of joy was very different in my 20s than what it is now. And
I guess we'll talk about that off podcast, what your definition.
Hey, deal. But, you are easy to root for. And, the invitation goes back. Obviously, however I can support, I'm in. But when the book comes out, whether it's Win-Win at Work or the sequel, Win-Win-Win at Work, there's the title, right? Well, let's get you back on. I'm curious to hear maybe a few months after the book launches and after the event, like what have you discovered? Like what's new? What's changed since you got this out into the universe? Obviously, we're going to link the study to the pod. Take us home. Last time, you know what? I do have one more. Like this is a one tour. We're back to multitasking. So I do think you should wrap for us. So like, what's the best way to wrap? But before that, let's say I did have a time machine, but it's only for me. I'm being selfish. So like, I'm now entering your Harvard lecture. It's the first day, and I'm sitting in the third row with all my new classmates. What is like the one point you want to land in the first class with me in the group?
And my students will tell you this if you go online and tell them, I was like, don't fall in love with your solution, fall in love with the problem. Because there's going to be many ways to solve a problem, right? And you want to be open to those, and you want to be open. You said, after I do this book, what do I learn? I'm sure there's going to be a ton of learnings, right? I still want to have the same impact, but I might go a different way based on what I learned. So that's my one. Always like, fall in love with the problem. The solution can be solved in many ways from there. So that's number one. That's applicable, I think, for everything. Whether you're advocating in a meeting, you're building a new business, just being open and kind of like flexible with that, how that solution works out. And then you asked me how I want to close it. I gave the invitation about the podcast, but I'd love to also give an invitation to any of your readers. If they sign up and buy a pre-sale copy of the book, I'd like to invite them in one of the tour stops I'm doing. It's 8 cities that we'll be in, and that's going to be on the website. And if they do a pre-sale of the book, in each city, we're going to have a great conversation with a leader in the city, a corporate leader. It's going to be a head of a foundation that we're going to be in conversation with. We'll be at South by Southwest. We'll be at ASU GSB in San Diego. We'll be in Miami with some really cool people. We're going to be in these great places and would love to just meet some folks in person.
So yeah, make sure you get me the San Diego dates for all
Okay.
obvious reasons, and I'll share that forward as well. Dr. Angela Jackson, this is the first of many combos. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.